The dust-laden wind whipped at Violet Walker's skirts as she stood on the porch of her modest homestead, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, the other clutching a crumpled letter, her husband's final goodbye. 3 years married to Garrett Walker, and all he'd ever wanted was sons to carry on his name, sons to work his land, sons to make him proud. But after their first daughter, Mary Grace, was born instead of the boy he'd anticipated, his disappointment had been palpable. When their second child, little Emma Rose, arrived 18 months later with delicate features and a head full of auburn curls instead of the rugged son he'd prayed for, Garrett's resentment had only deepened. It was 1878 in Ardmore, Oklahoma Territory, and Violet knew she wasn't the first woman to be abandoned by her husband, but knowing that didn't lessen the sting of betrayal. At 26, she now faced the daunting prospect of raising 2 young daughters alone, with a third child due in less than a month. "Mama," 5-year-old Mary Grace tugged at her skirts, her dark eyes so like her father's wide with concern. "Is Papa coming home today?" Violet swallowed hard, forcing back the tears that threatened to spill. "No, sweetheart, Papa had to go away for a while." How could she tell her daughters that their father had left them because they weren't boys? That in his letter, he'd written he couldn't bear the thought of a third daughter and was heading west to California to start fresh. When will he be back? Mary Grace persisted, her small face pinched with worry. "I don't know, my love," Violet answered honestly, brushing a strand of dark hair from her daughter's face. "But we'll be just fine. We have each other, and that's what matters most." 3-year-old Emma Rose toddled out onto the porch, clutching her well-worn rag doll. "Papa?" she asked hopefully, her gaze scanning the dusty road that led to their small farm. "Come here, my sweet girls," Violet said, kneeling down despite her awkward condition to gather both children into her arms. "We're going to be brave together, all right. Mama promises we'll be just fine." But as she held her daughters close, Violet wondered how she would manage the 20 acres of land, the small herd of cattle, the vegetable garden that needed tending, and the chickens that required daily care, all while caring for 2 young children and soon a newborn. Garrett had left them with precious little money, and the mortgage payment to the bank in town was due at the end of the month. That night, after the girls were tucked into bed, Violet sat at the kitchen table, tallying what meager resources remained to them. The reality was stark and unyielding. Without help, they would lose everything within months. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks as she placed her hands over her belly, feeling the strong kicks of the child within. "I don't care if you're a boy or a girl," she whispered fiercely. "I'll love you just the same. I promise you that." 3 weeks later, as a summer storm lashed against the windows, Violet gave birth to another daughter with the help of Widow Jenkins from the neighboring farm. They named her Charlotte Ann, and she had a shock of copper hair and eyes the color of a clear summer sky. "3 beautiful girls," Widow Jenkins remarked, cleaning up while Violet nursed the newborn. "Your husband must be proud." Violet didn't have the heart to tell her that Garrett had been gone for nearly a month, that he had abandoned them all before even knowing if his third child was the son he'd so desperately wanted. Instead, she merely nodded, focusing on Charlotte's perfect tiny features, memorizing every detail of her newest daughter's face. The reality of their precarious situation became even more apparent in the days following Charlotte's birth. Weak from childbirth, Violet struggled to keep up with even the most basic chores. The vegetable garden was withering in the summer heat, the cattle were growing thin with neglect, and the small field of corn that Garrett had planted before his departure was choked with weeds. One evening, as Violet sat on the porch nursing Charlotte, while Mary Grace and Emma Rose played with smooth stones in the yard, a rider appeared on the horizon. Hope flared briefly in her chest. Perhaps Garrett had changed his mind and returned, but she quickly recognized that the approaching silhouette was not her husband's. As the rider drew closer, Violet could make out a lean, broad-shouldered man atop a dappled gray stallion. He wore the practical attire of a working cowboy: worn denims, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the setting sun. Mary Grace and Emma Rose stopped their play, watching with curiosity as the stranger approached. Violet adjusted her shawl to cover herself and the nursing infant, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance and the general state of disrepair that had befallen the farm. The cowboy reined his horse to a stop a respectful distance from the house. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice deep but gentle. "Name's Ben Caldwell. I don't mean to intrude, but I'm looking for Garrett Walker. I was told this is his spread." Violet felt her chest tighten at the mention of her husband's name. "Mr. Walker isn't here," she replied carefully, not yet ready to reveal to strangers the shame of her abandonment. The cowboy Benjamin removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and a face weathered by years under the open sky. His eyes, a striking shade of green, regarded her with a kindness that made her throat constrict unexpectedly. "I see," he said, seeming to sense there was more to the story than she was sharing. "Well, I was hoping to speak with him about some cattle he was interested in purchasing. I work for the Collins Ranch over in the Red River Valley." "My husband won't be returning any time soon," Violet said, deciding that at least some truth was necessary. "Any business you had with him will need to wait indefinitely." Benjamin nodded slowly, his gaze taking in the overgrown fields, the listless cattle in the distance, and the generally neglected state of the farm. His eyes then moved to the two young girls watching him with undisguised curiosity, and finally, to the bundle in Violet's arms. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Walker, but it seems like you could use some help around here," he said, his direct manner somehow lacking offense. Pride rose swiftly in Violet's chest. "We're managing just fine, Mr. Caldwell." A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "No disrespect intended, madam, but your cattle are about a week away from breaking through that fence looking for better grazing, and that cornfield's not going to yield much of a harvest without some immediate attention." Violet felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. He was right, of course. She was drowning, barely keeping her head above water, and it was obvious to anyone with eyes. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Caldwell, but Ben," he interrupted gently. "Most folks just call me Ben." "Ben, then," she continued. "I appreciate your concern, but I can't afford to hire help right now." He shifted his weight in the saddle, seeming to consider something. "I wasn't looking for payment, Mrs. Walker, just trying to be neighborly. I've got some time before I need to head back to the Collins Ranch, and it doesn't sit right with me to ride away leaving a woman and children in a tight spot." Violet studied him, searching for any hint of ulterior motive in his offer. All she saw was genuine concern and perhaps a trace of admiration in his steady gaze. "Why would you help strangers, Mr. Caldwell?" "Ben," he reminded her with a small smile. "And I reckon my ma raised me to believe that helping folks in need isn't just neighborly, it's the right thing to do." Before Violet could respond, Mary Grace stepped forward, her natural boldness asserting itself. "Our papa went away," she announced, looking up at the tall cowboy. "Mama says we don't know when he's coming back." Violet's heart clenched at her daughter's innocent revelation. Ben's expression softened as he looked down at the little girl. "Is that so?" he said gently, then glanced back at Violet with a question in his eyes. Violet gave a slight nod, acknowledging the truth of her daughter's words. Ben dismounted with fluid grace, tying his horse to the porch railing before kneeling down to Mary Grace's eye level. "Well, my name is Ben. What's yours, young lady?" "Mary Grace Walker," she replied proudly. "I'm 5 years old, and that's my sister Emma Rose. She's 3. And the baby is Charlotte. She's brand new." Ben smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Mary Grace Walker." He tipped his hat to her, then to Emma Rose, who was partially hiding behind her sister. "And you too, Miss Emma Rose." He straightened and turned back to Violet. "Mrs. Walker, I don't mean to pry into your personal affairs, but if your husband is away, I'd be happy to lend a hand with the more pressing matters around your farm. No strings attached, just one neighbor helping another." Violet hesitated. She'd been raised to be independent and proud, but she was also practical enough to know when she needed help. The mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks, and without tending to the cattle and bringing in at least part of the corn harvest, they wouldn't make it. "I can't pay you," she reiterated. "I'm not asking for payment," he assured her. "Just maybe a meal now and then if it's not too much trouble." After another moment's hesitation, Violet nodded. "All right, Mr. Caldwell, Ben. I would be grateful for your help, at least until I can make other arrangements." His smile was warm and genuine. "Good. I'll start first thing tomorrow morning if that suits you." And so began an arrangement that was meant to be temporary but somehow stretched into days, then weeks. Ben arrived early each morning, working tirelessly to repair fences, tend to the cattle, salvage what he could of the corn crop, and address the 100 other tasks that had fallen into neglect. He showed a surprising gentleness with the animals, and an even more surprising patience with Mary Grace and Emma Rose, who quickly became his devoted shadows. Violet observed him from a cautious distance at first, still stinging from Garrett's betrayal and wary of allowing another man into their lives. But as the days passed, she couldn't deny the transformation taking place around them. Under Ben's capable hands, the farm was slowly coming back to life. One evening, about 2 weeks after Ben had first appeared on their doorstep, Violet invited him to stay for supper as a small thank you for his tireless work. She'd prepared a simple meal of stew and cornbread, using vegetables from the garden he'd helped resurrect. "This is mighty fine cooking, Mrs. Walker," Ben said appreciatively as he savored a spoonful of stew. "Violet," she corrected him with a small smile. "If I'm to call you Ben, you should call me Violet." He nodded, a pleased expression crossing his features. "Violet it is, then." Mary Grace, always full of questions, regarded Ben with intense curiosity. "Why don't you have a wife and babies, Mr. Ben, Mary Grace?" Violet admonished, horrified at her daughter's bluntness, but Ben only chuckled. "That's a fair question, Miss Mary Grace. I suppose I've been too busy working and traveling to settle down. A cowboy's life doesn't leave much time for courting." "You want babies someday?" Emma Rose piped up, not to be outdone by her sister. Ben's expression softened as he looked at the 2 girls. "I reckon I'd be mighty blessed to have children as fine as you 2 someday." "Papa wanted boys," Mary Grace said matter-of-factly, causing Violet to nearly choke on her water. "He told Mama that girls weren't much use on a farm." The table fell silent as Ben carefully set down his spoon, his eyes finding Violet's across the table. The pain and embarrassment she felt must have been visible on her face, because his expression filled with a gentle understanding that somehow made it worse. "Well now," Ben said after a moment, turning back to Mary Grace, "I have to respectfully disagree with your papa on that count. Some of the strongest, smartest, most capable people I've ever known have been women. My own mother ran our family farm after my father passed, and she did it better than most men could have." Mary Grace considered this, then nodded as if his answer satisfied her. "I'm strong," she declared. "I can help with the farm, too." "You certainly are," Ben agreed with a warm smile. "And you're already a big help. Why, just today you showed me where to find those chicken eggs that were hidden in the tall grass." As the meal continued, Violet watched Ben interact with her daughters, marveling at his natural ease with children and his unfailing patience with their endless questions. It was such a stark contrast to Garrett, who had always been irritated by the girls' chatter, viewing their very existence as a personal disappointment. Later, after the girls were in bed and Ben was preparing to leave for the night, Violet found the courage to address what Mary Grace had revealed. About what Mary Grace said. She began awkwardly as they stood on the porch in the cool evening air. "You don't owe me any explanations, Violet," Ben said gently. "Perhaps not, but I'd like to give you one anyway." She took a deep breath. "Garrett left us a month ago, just before Charlotte was born. He wanted sons. When he learned I was expecting a third child, he couldn't bear the thought that it might be another girl. So he left, said he was heading to California to start over." Ben was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "If you'll forgive my plain speaking, that makes your husband a fool and a coward." Surprised by his vehemence, Violet looked up to find his green eyes blazing with an intensity that took her breath away. "Those girls in there," he continued, gesturing toward the house, "are perfect just as they are. And so is that baby you're holding. Any man worth his salt would count himself blessed beyond measure to have such a family." Tears sprang unexpectedly to Violet's eyes at his words, tears she'd been holding back for too long. "Thank you," she whispered, looking down at Charlotte sleeping peacefully in her arms. Ben reached out hesitantly, then seemed to think better of it, letting his hand fall back to his side. "I should be going," he said. "I'll be back tomorrow to finish mending that north fence." Violet nodded, not trusting herself to speak past the lump in her throat. As Ben untied his horse and prepared to mount, he paused, turning back to her. "For what it's worth, Violet, I think you're doing an admirable job under difficult circumstances. Your daughters are lucky to have such a strong mother." With that, he swung into the saddle and rode off into the darkness, leaving Violet standing on the porch with a curious warmth spreading through her chest, despite the cool night air. Over the next several weeks, as summer gave way to early autumn, Ben's daily presence became a comfortable constant in their lives. He worked from sunrise to sunset, bringing order to the chaos that had threatened to overwhelm Violet after Garrett's departure. Under his careful management, the remaining corn was harvested, the cattle grew healthier, and the fences were repaired. More than that, he brought laughter back into their home. He taught Mary Grace to whittle simple shapes from wood, showed Emma Rose how to call chickens with a special clucking sound, and always had a gentle word for baby Charlotte, who seemed to save her brightest smiles for him. Violet found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noticing the way the sun had burnished his skin to a deep tan, how his hands were strong but capable of surprising gentleness, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. And he smiled often, especially around her daughters. She also noticed how he never spoke of leaving any more, how his temporary assistance had somehow transformed into something more permanent without either of them acknowledging the change. Each evening he would ride back to the small cabin he rented in town, and each morning he would return, as dependable as the sunrise. It was on a crisp October morning when everything changed. Violet was hanging laundry while Charlotte napped in a basket nearby. Ben was working in the nearby corral, breaking a young horse that would eventually pull their wagon. Mary Grace and Emma Rose were helping by handing Violet clothespins and chattering excitedly about the upcoming harvest festival in town. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Violet's attention to the road. A familiar figure on horseback was approaching, and as he drew closer, her heart seemed to stop in her chest. Garrett. Her husband looked much as he had when he'd left 4 months earlier, perhaps a bit thinner, his clothes more worn. He reined his horse to a stop and dismounted, his gaze taking in the improved condition of the farm before settling on Violet and the girls. "Papa!" Mary Grace cried, recognizing him instantly despite the months of absence. She started to run toward him, but something in Violet's expression made her hesitate. Ben had noticed the newcomer as well and was now approaching from the corral, his stance cautious but resolute. "Violet," Garrett called, his voice carrying across the yard. "I've come home." Violet felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. After all this time, after all the pain and struggle, Garrett had simply decided to return. She found herself unable to move or speak as he walked toward them. His eyes fell on the basket where Charlotte slept. "Another girl, I take it," he said, his tone making it clear what he thought of that development. "Her name is Charlotte," Violet replied, finding her voice at last. "Charlotte Ann Walker." Garrett nodded dismissively, then turned his attention to Ben, who had positioned himself slightly between Garrett and Violet's family. "And who might you be?" he asked, a note of challenge in his voice. "Ben Caldwell," Ben answered evenly. "I've been helping Mrs. Walker with the farm." A knowing smirk crossed Garrett's face. "Helping, is it? And what form does this help take exactly, Garrett?" Violet warned, acutely aware of her daughter's presence. "It's a reasonable question, Violet," Garrett replied. "I leave for a few months and return to find another man on my property, living in my house." "I don't live here," Ben interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "And it seems to me that when a man abandons his wife and children, he forfeits certain rights to question who helps them in his absence." Garrett's face darkened with anger. "This is my farm and my family. I'll thank you to leave my property immediately." "No," Violet said, the word hanging in the air between them. All three adults turned to look at her in surprise. "What did you say?" Garrett asked, his tone dangerous. "I said no," Violet repeated, stronger this time. "Ben stays. He's the only reason we still have this farm, the only reason your daughters haven't gone hungry these past months." Garrett took a step toward her, his face flushing with anger. "Now you listen here, Violet." "No, you listen," she interrupted, a lifetime of deference falling away in the face of her determination to protect what mattered most. "You left us, Garrett. You left me alone, pregnant, with 2 small children to care for and a farm that was more than I could manage alone. You left because our daughters weren't the sons you wanted." She gestured toward Ben. "This man, a virtual stranger, showed more concern for your family in his first 5 minutes here than you demonstrated in years of marriage. He never once complained about the work, never made me feel that my daughters were somehow lacking because they weren't boys, never treated them as anything less than the precious gifts they are." Garrett's expression grew thunderous. "So that's how it is. I'm gone a few months and you take up with the first cowboy who wanders by." "It's not like that," Ben interjected, his tone warning. "It's exactly like that," Garrett spat. "Well, you're welcome to her, Caldwell, but this is my land, my house, and I'll be taking what's mine." "Nothing here is yours anymore," Violet stated, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "I've been making the mortgage payments. I've been working this land. The cattle are healthier than they've ever been under your care. If you want to discuss legal ownership, we can ride into Ardmore and speak to Judge Patterson right now." Garrett stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Perhaps he was. The Violet who had married him 7 years ago would never have stood up to him this way, would never have challenged his authority or his right to return whenever he pleased. "You've changed," he said finally, a note of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Yes," she acknowledged. "I have." Necessity will do that to a person. Mary Grace had inched her way closer during this exchange and now stood beside Violet, her small hand slipping into her mother's. Emma Rose remained a few steps back, watching with wide, solemn eyes. "Papa," Mary Grace said hesitantly. "Are you staying this time?" The simple question seemed to deflate Garrett somewhat. He looked at his eldest daughter, then at Emma Rose, and finally at the infant sleeping peacefully, unaware of the drama unfolding around her. "I—" he began, then stopped, uncertainty crossing his features. "I came back because things didn't work out in California. I thought I could come home." "This was never really home to you, was it?" Violet asked softly. "It was just a place you stayed until something better came along. These girls were never enough for you. I was never enough." The truth of her words seemed to hang in the air between them. Garrett didn't deny them. "What do you want, Violet?" he asked finally. "I want you to leave," she said, her voice steady despite the enormity of what she was saying. "I want you to give us a proper divorce so the girls and I can move forward with our lives. I want you to relinquish any claim to this farm and to them." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "And if I refuse? If I assert my legal rights as your husband and their father?" "Then we'll fight you," Ben said quietly. "Every step of the way. Judge Patterson is a fair man, but he doesn't look kindly on men who abandon their families. Neither does the rest of Ardmore." Garrett looked between them, seeming to weigh his options. After a long moment, he gave a short, bitter laugh. "You know what? Keep the farm, keep the brats. It was never what I wanted anyway." He turned and walked back to his horse, mounting with practiced ease. Looking down at them one last time, he addressed Violet. "I'll sign whatever papers you need when I pass through town. Don't expect anything else from me." With that, he spurred his horse and rode away, kicking up dust that lingered in the air long after he disappeared from sight. The silence that followed was broken only by Emma Rose's small voice. "Is Papa going away again?" Violet knelt down, gathering both girls into her arms. "Yes, sweetheart, Papa is going away again. But this time we know he's not coming back, and that's okay. We have each other and we have our home." She glanced up at Ben, who stood nearby, his expression a mix of concern and something deeper she couldn't quite name. "And we have friends who care about us very much," she added softly. That evening, after the girls were in bed, Violet and Ben sat on the porch steps in comfortable silence, watching as the last light faded from the western sky. Charlotte slept peacefully in Violet's arms, her tiny face relaxed in slumber. "Are you all right?" Ben asked finally, his voice gentle in the growing darkness. Violet considered the question honestly. "Yes," she said after a moment. "I think I am. Seeing Garrett today, it confirmed what I've known for some time now. Our marriage was over long before he physically left." Ben nodded, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "For what it's worth, I think you handled yourself admirably today." A small smile touched her lips. "It felt good to stand up for myself, for my daughters. I've spent too many years trying to be what Garrett wanted instead of being who I am." "And who are you, Violet Walker?" Ben asked, turning to look at her. The question caught her off guard, but she found herself answering truthfully. "I'm a mother who would do anything for her children. I'm a woman who's stronger than she ever realized. I'm someone who's learning that it's okay to accept help when it's offered with a kind heart." Ben's smile was warm in the gathering dusk. "I'd say that's a pretty good start." They fell silent again, the night sounds of crickets and distant coyotes filling the air around them. Finally, Ben spoke again, his voice hesitant. "I should probably tell you that I received word from the Collins Ranch yesterday. They're expecting me back within the week." Violet felt her heart constrict painfully at his words. Of course, he would be leaving. He had his own life, his own responsibilities. The fact that he'd stayed as long as he had was already far beyond what she could have reasonably expected. "Of course," she said, struggling to keep her voice neutral. "You've already done more than enough for us, Ben. We'll never be able to thank you properly." "I don't want your thanks, Violet," he said, turning to face her fully now. "That's not why I stayed." "Then why did you?" she asked softly, hardly daring to hope what his answer might be. Ben was quiet for a long moment, seemingly gathering his thoughts. "When I first rode up to your farm, I was just passing through, delivering a message. I had no intention of staying more than a few minutes. But then I saw you standing on this very porch, a newborn in your arms and two little girls at your feet, trying so hard to hold everything together despite the odds stacked against you." He shook his head, a rueful smile playing at his lips. "I told myself I was just being neighborly, just helping out temporarily. But the truth is, Violet, I stayed because something about you and your daughters captured my heart from that very first day." Violet's breath caught in her throat as Ben continued. "I fell in love with Mary Grace's curiosity and Emma Rose's quiet sweetness. I fell in love with Charlotte's tiny perfect fingers and the way she smiles in her sleep." His voice grew softer. "And I fell in love with your strength, your grace under pressure, your unwavering devotion to your children." He reached out tentatively, his rough hand gently covering hers where it rested on the porch step. "I know it's too soon. I know you've barely begun to heal from Garrett's betrayal, but I wanted you to know why I stayed and why it's so hard for me to leave now." Violet looked down at their hands, his large and calloused from years of hard work, her smaller but equally work-worn. What if you didn't have to leave?" she asked, hardly believing her own boldness. Ben's eyes widened slightly. "What are you saying, Violet?" "I'm saying that the girls and I have come to depend on you, Ben, not just for your help with the farm, but for your kindness, your patience, your steadiness." She took a deep breath. "I'm saying that the thought of you riding away makes my heart ache in a way I never expected." A slow smile spread across his features, illuminating his eyes even in the dim light of dusk. "Are you asking me to stay, Violet Walker?" "Yes," she whispered. "I'm asking you to stay, not as our helper or our protector, but as—" She faltered, suddenly uncertain. "As what?" he prompted gently. "As whatever you want to be to us," she finished, meeting his gaze steadily despite her racing heart. Ben's hand tightened on hers. "What I want," he said slowly, "is to be a father to those girls, to watch them grow, to teach them, to protect them. And what I want, Violet, if you'll have me, is to be a husband to you. Not right away, I know you need time, but someday when you're ready." Tears welled in Violet's eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "The girls already adore you," she said softly. "And I—" She hesitated, then decided that after everything they'd been through, honesty was the only path forward. "And I find myself thinking about you far more than is probably proper." Ben's laugh was warm and rich in the darkness. "Well, I've been thinking improperly about you for quite some time now, so I reckon that makes us even." Charlotte stirred in Violet's arms, making small snuffling noises before settling back to sleep. Ben reached out, gently stroking the infant's downy head with one finger. "I'll never understand how Garrett could walk away from this," he murmured. "These girls are perfect, every one of them, and so are you, Violet." Without overthinking it, Violet leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief and sweet, a promise of things to come rather than a passionate declaration. When she pulled back, Ben's expression was one of wonder. "I'll write to Mr. Collins tomorrow," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "I'll tell him I've found a reason to put down roots here in Ardmore." "Are you certain?" Violet asked. "The cowboy life is all you've known." Ben smiled, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending a shiver through her. "I've spent years roaming from one ranch to another, never staying long enough to form attachments. But something tells me that building a life here, with you and the girls, will be the greatest adventure I've ever undertaken." In that moment, with the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky above them and her daughters sleeping peacefully inside, Violet felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in a way she'd never experienced before. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges and hardships, as there always were in frontier life, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone in facing them. "Then stay," she said simply. "Stay and be part of our family," and so he did. In the months that followed, Ben became an integral part of their lives. He moved into the small cabin behind the main house, a concession to propriety that both of them respected, even as their feelings for each other deepened. He worked tirelessly alongside Violet to make the farm profitable, introducing new techniques he'd learned during his years of traveling and trading with neighboring farms to expand their livestock. Word spread quickly through Ardmore about Garrett's abandonment and Ben's steadfast presence in the Walker family's life. Most folks approved of the arrangement, admiring Ben's honorable conduct and Violet's determination to provide for her children. A few gossiped, of course, as people always do, but their whispers held little power against the reality of the family's happiness. Judge Patterson granted Violet's divorce with surprising speed, perhaps influenced by Garrett's evident disinterest in contesting it and the town's general sympathy for Violet's situation. With the legal ties severed, Violet felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. As winter settled over Oklahoma territory, bringing short days and long, cold nights, the little family grew closer. Ben taught Mary Grace and Emma Rose to build snowmen in the yard when the first heavy snow fell. He carved a crude but charming cradle for Charlotte, who was growing plumper and more alert each day. And in the evenings, after the girls were asleep, he and Violet would sit by the fire, planning for the farm's future and, increasingly, for their own. It was on Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and the house fragrant with pine boughs and cinnamon, that Ben finally proposed properly. He'd carved wooden toys for each of the girls, a little horse for Mary Grace, a doll for Emma Rose, and a rattle for Charlotte. For Violet, he presented a small wooden box containing a simple silver ring. "It was my mother's," he explained as Violet stared at it in wonder. "My father gave it to her when they homesteaded in Texas, long before I was born. She gave it to me before she passed, told me to save it for the woman who captured my heart." Kneeling before her in front of the crackling fire, Ben took her hand in his. "Violet Walker, I love you and your daughters more than I ever thought possible. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" With tears of joy streaming down her face, Violet nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." Mary Grace and Emma Rose, who had been watching with wide eyes, erupted into cheers, rushing forward to throw their arms around both adults. Even baby Charlotte, cradled in Violet's lap, seemed to sense the importance of the moment, cooing happily and reaching for Ben's face. They were married on a clear, cold day in February 1879, in the small white church in Ardmore. Mary Grace and Emma Rose served as flower girls, scattering dried rose petals saved from the previous summer's garden. Charlotte, now 8 months old, was held by Widow Jenkins, who had become something of a grandmother figure to the family. As Violet walked down the aisle in a simple blue dress she'd refused to wear white, feeling it wouldn't be honest, she saw Ben waiting for her at the altar, his green eyes shining with such love and pride that it nearly took her breath away. Standing beside him were her 3 daughters, all dressed in matching cream-colored dresses with blue sashes that Violet had stayed up late sewing. "They're beautiful," Ben whispered as she reached his side, looking at the girls. "All 4 of my girls are beautiful." The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ben kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of his reverence for the family they were forming together. The small congregation erupted in applause, genuinely happy for the couple who had overcome so much adversity. At the modest reception held in the church hall afterward, Violet found a moment to slip away from the well-wishers. She stood by a window, watching the winter sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered ground outside, reflecting on how much her life had changed in less than a year. Having second thoughts already, "Mrs. Caldwell," Ben's teasing voice came from behind her as his arms slipped around her waist. Violet leaned back against his solid chest, savoring the warmth and security of his embrace. "Just the opposite," she assured him. "I was thinking how fortunate I am. A year ago I felt so alone, so abandoned, and now—" "And now," he prompted, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "And now I have more love in my life than I ever dreamed possible." Ben turned her in his arms to face him. "You know, I've been thinking about something Mary Grace said a while back, about her father wanting sons instead of daughters." Violet tensed slightly, the memory still painful despite all the healing that had occurred. "I want you to know," Ben continued, his expression earnest, "that if we're blessed with more children, whether they're sons or daughters won't matter to me in the slightest. Your girls have already shown me that gender has nothing to do with worth or capability." Tears pricked at Violet's eyes as she reached up to cup his face in her hands. "How did I get so lucky to find a man like you?" Ben smiled, leaning down to kiss her softly. "I'm the lucky one, Violet Caldwell. Don't you ever forget it." They returned to the celebration hand in hand, both aware of the curious blend of endings and beginnings that their marriage represented. As they watched Mary Grace and Emma Rose twirling happily on the makeshift dance floor, with Charlotte bouncing excitedly in Widow Jenkins' lap, they shared a look of perfect understanding. This was their family, now unconventional in its beginnings, perhaps, but no less real or precious for that fact. Spring arrived with its usual exuberance in Oklahoma territory, bringing with it renewed life and activity on the Caldwell farm, as it was now known throughout Ardmore. The cattle thrived under Ben's experienced care, and Violet's vegetable garden flourished, providing not only for their family but producing enough surplus to sell in town. It was on a warm May evening, with the sun setting gold and pink over the western horizon, that Violet shared her news with Ben. They were sitting on the porch swing he'd built as a wedding present, watching Mary Grace and Emma Rose chase fireflies in the yard while Charlotte, now walking with determined if wobbly steps, toddled after them. "Ben," Violet said, her voice soft with wonder, "I'm going to have a baby." Ben's head turned sharply toward her, his eyes wide with surprise and then dawning joy. "Truly," she nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Dr. Mitchell confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. The baby should arrive around Christmas." Ben whooped with delight, lifting her from the swing and spinning her around, much to the amusement of the girls, who abandoned their firefly chase to investigate the commotion. "What is it, Papa Ben?" Mary Grace asked, having adopted the name for her stepfather almost immediately after the wedding, Ben set Violet down gently, keeping one arm around her waist as he beamed at the children. "Your mama has just given me the best news," he announced. "By Christmas, you're all going to have a new little brother or sister." The girls' reactions were predictably enthusiastic, with Mary Grace and Emma Rose peppering them with questions about the baby, and Charlotte simply clapping her hands in imitation of her sister's excitement, though she couldn't possibly understand what was happening. Later that night, as they lay in bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Ben placed a gentle hand on Violet's still flat stomach. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what?" she asked, covering his hand with her own. "For this new life we're creating together. For trusting me to be a father to your daughters. For giving me a family when I'd resigned myself to a solitary existence." Violet turned in his arms to face him, tracing the beloved contours of his face with her fingertips. "You know, in a strange way, I'm almost grateful for Garrett's departure. If he hadn't left, I would never have known what it's like to be truly loved for exactly who I am." Ben caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "His loss, my immeasurable gain." The months of Violet's pregnancy passed in a blur of activity. Ben continued to improve the farm, adding to their cattle herd and even purchasing an additional 30 acres of adjoining land when it became available. Mary Grace started school in Ardmore, proudly riding to town each day on the pony Ben had trained especially for her. Emma Rose helped Violet with simple household tasks, showing a natural talent for cooking that surprised and delighted them both. And Charlotte grew from a baby into a definite toddler, her copper curls bouncing as she explored the world around her with fearless curiosity. Through it all, Ben's devotion to his new family never wavered. He attended every school event for Mary Grace, patiently taught Emma Rose to ride her own small pony, and spent hours playing with Charlotte, never too tired after a long day's work to get down on the floor and build block towers for her to gleefully knock down. And his tenderness toward Violet only deepened as her pregnancy progressed. He massaged her aching back in the evenings, took over more of the household duties when her energy flagged, and constantly assured her of her beauty, especially when she felt awkward and ungainly in the later months. When December arrived, bringing with it bitter cold and the excitement of the approaching holidays, Violet found herself reflecting on the previous Christmas, when Ben had proposed beside the fire. So much had changed in a year, all for the better. The baby, apparently eager to join the family celebrations, arrived 2 weeks early, on a snowy evening just before Christmas. The labor was faster than Violet's previous deliveries, and within hours, Ben was holding their son in his arms, his expression one of absolute wonder. "A boy," he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he gazed at the infant's tiny features. "We have a son, Violet." Exhausted but radiant, Violet smiled up at him. "Are you disappointed?" she teased gently. "That it's not a fourth daughter?" Ben looked at her in genuine confusion. "Disappointed? How could I possibly be disappointed by this perfect child?" He carefully placed their son in her arms, then sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around her shoulders as they both gazed at the newest member of their family. "What shall we name him?" Ben asked. Violet had been pondering this question for months. "I'd like to name him after your father, if that's all right with you." Ben's breath caught audibly. "William. You'd name him William." "William Benjamin Caldwell," Violet confirmed. "If you approve." Ben leaned down to kiss her forehead, his voice thick with emotion. "I approve wholeheartedly." The door creaked open and 3 curious faces peeked into the room. Mary Grace, now 7, Emma Rose, 5, and Charlotte, not quite 2. Ben motioned them in, helping them climb carefully onto the bed to meet their new brother. "He's so tiny," Mary Grace whispered in awe, gently touching William's downy dark hair. "He's red," Emma Rose observed pragmatically. Charlotte simply patted the bundle gently, declaring, "Baby," with solemn satisfaction. Ben gathered all three girls into his arms, holding them close as they gazed at their mother and new brother. "What do you think, girls? Is he a fine addition to our family?" Mary Grace nodded decisively. "He's perfect, Papa Ben. Just like you said we were perfect when you first came." Ben's eyes met Violet's over the children's heads, both of them remembering that pivotal moment on the porch when he had declared the girls perfect just as they were. How far they had come since that day. "That's right, Mary Grace," Ben said, his voice gentle with love. "You girls were perfect then and you're perfect now. And so is your brother and so is your mama." "And so are you, Papa Ben," Emma Rose added loyally. Ben laughed, the sound warm and rich in the cozy bedroom. "Well, I don't know about that, but I do know that I'm the luckiest man in Oklahoma Territory." "Why?" Charlotte asked, always ready to echo her sister's questions. Ben smiled, looking around at the family he had found when he least expected it. "Because I have all of you to love, and all of you love me back. And there's no greater fortune than that in this whole wide world." As the snow fell gently outside their window and the fire crackled in the hearth, the Caldwell family gathered close around their newest member, their hearts full of the love and acceptance they had created together. For Violet, who had once feared she would never be enough, and for Ben, who had wandered for so long without roots, this moment was the culmination of a journey neither had expected to take. It wasn't always easy in the years that followed. Life in Oklahoma Territory demanded resilience and hard work from all who sought to carve out a living from its rugged beauty. There were droughts and floods, illnesses and accidents, financial worries, and the normal conflicts that arise in any family. But through it all, Ben and Violet faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. Their family continued to grow. A second son, James, joined them 2 years after William, followed by twin daughters, Sarah and Rebecca, 3 years later. Mary Grace eventually married the son of a neighboring rancher and settled nearby, raising her own family within visiting distance of her childhood home. Emma Rose discovered a talent for teaching and became the schoolmistress in Ardmore, her gentle patience perfect for guiding young minds. Charlotte, with her fearless spirit and quick intelligence, surprised everyone by studying medicine and becoming one of the territory's first female doctors. And occasionally, over the years, they would hear news of Garrett Walker. He had indeed gone to California, had remarried and, ironically, had fathered 3 more daughters and no sons. Whether he ever came to appreciate the blessings he had abandoned, they never knew. On their 30th wedding anniversary, as Ben and Violet sat on the same porch where their story had begun, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and the evidence of a life well lived, Ben took his wife's hand in his, marveling at how it still fit perfectly in his own despite the passage of years. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Taking a chance on a dusty cowboy who rode up to your farm that day?" Violet smiled, the years having etched fine lines around her eyes but done nothing to diminish the warmth of her expression. "Not for a single moment," she assured him. "You taught me what true love looks like, Ben. You showed me that I was enough exactly as I was, and you gave my daughters, our daughters, the father they deserved." Ben leaned over to kiss her, still moved by her words after all these years. "And you gave me the family I never knew I was searching for," he replied. "The day I found you and the girls was the luckiest day of my life." As the sun set over the prosperous farm that they had built together, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Ben and Violet Caldwell watched their grandchildren play in the same yard where Mary Grace and Emma Rose had once chased fireflies. The journey that had brought them to this moment had begun in abandonment and uncertainty, but had blossomed into a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. In the end, what Garrett had viewed as disappointment's three perfect daughters had become the foundation of a family bound by love rather than obligation, by choice rather than expectation. And in that family, every child, daughter, or son was treasured not for what they represented, but for who they were. It was, both Ben and Violet often reflected, the greatest love story either of them could have imagined. Not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real, built day by day, choice by choice, through hardship and joy, with unwavering faith in each other and in the family they had created together.